Seth Rollins is back for revenge on Bronson Reed as Rollins interfered and seemingly was the deciding factor in allowing Braun Strowman to win the last monster standing match on this week's edition of WWE Raw, and we know that was the reason that Rollins had not been around for a bit, was because of the attack by Bronson Reed, which was where things really started to take off for Bronson Reed in terms of his ascent up the card on Monday Night Raw. And unfortunately for Reed, it's Rollins who returns to cost him this match in what was exactly what we thought it would be, right? Just complete destruction everywhere. These two guys going around, putting each other through a lot of hard objects, and ultimately, though, it is Strowman who gets the win with an assist from Seth Rollins. And, again, we said, kind of coming into this, each time you put these two out there with Reed and Strowman, they have to find a way to top each other, right? They have to find a way to be able to do something the next time that has even more of that added effect than they did previously. And everyone wondered, were we going to get the big spot that is one of the most memorable spots in WWE history when Brock Lesnar and The Big Show broke the ring many, many years ago? And people were wondering, were they going to do a callback to that? And sure enough, just as we expected, they did, because you had the superplex off the top, and that leads to the ring collapsing. You got the referee taking the dive out of the ring. You got the security officials down, and pure chaos ringside there. You can recycle the broken ring, especially in a setting like this where you have building to, this Braun Strowman versus Bronson Reed, all about power, all about impact, and that's what happened here, is these two guys break the ring. I thought it was a nice added touch to throw that in there, in addition to the choke slams onto tables, people getting thrown off, onto other tables, the spear through the barricade, endless kind of, spots in this match that, added that extra something, which we knew they were going to kind of all culminate in this one big match. But I think, of course, what you get coming out of this is, I'm curious what is next for Braun Strowman, because this was kind of reheating Braun Strowman a little bit, right? I mean, he had been out of action for a while, came back, and you were curious, how Triple H would use him, because he is one of your monster type, people on this roster, and being able to pair him with Bronson Reed was perfect because you could play off of each other's strengths here. And now we kind of see what's next for Braun Strowman coming out of this. But we also have to figure out what's next for Bronson Reed, right? And well, we know the immediate thing is certainly going to be a program with Seth Rollins, because that was something that was always building to this point after it was Reed hitting tsunami after tsunami after tsunami on Rollins to put him out of action. And now we see where they go from here, because it's a very important, sort of, I think, feud for Bronson Reed, because again, you see what he's become, right? Since he attacked Seth Rollins, you see how his star has kind of, risen quite a bit in WWE now. I mean, he's been one of the more must-see attractions, I think, on Raw for a while now, really since that attack, because that was the thing, as we said, that sort of, gave him liftoff in terms of being someone who felt like much more of a big deal. And he is now, been put in a position where I think he's, doing the best work of his career, because he's been given the opportunity to do that based on how they presented him. And so now, we're going to get that inevitable match between him and Rollins. And the question is, certainly you have to put Reed in a situation where he still feels strong coming out of, this feud with Rollins. Because, yes, Reed is going to overpower Rollins. He's stronger in all these things that they've really been pushing. But you also know that Seth Rollins is probably likely, sooner rather than later, getting back into that world title picture. And if you're going to, get Rollins back in that discussion, he's probably going to, maybe need to win this feud that he's going to have with Bronson Reed. But it's at least a lot more interesting than it would have been previously. And there's a lot of different ways they can go with it. And let's call it what it is, too. I mean, there have been a little more of these unpredictable aspects as of late, whether it is, a Jey Uso surprisingly winning the Intercontinental Championship last week. What other moves could Triple H have up his sleeve in terms of, having these different ideas? And who knows, maybe Bronson Reed does get a chance to beat Seth Rollins in this feud. Could it be multiple matches? That's always a possibility. But I do think this was the right time to bring Rollins back, and it does, at the same time give Braun Strowman a huge win, but it also angers Bronson Reed, and that could not be good for Seth Rollins if we have an angry Bronson Reed coming out of this based on the impact that he's made over the past, couple months now, I guess. So, yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how they do this with Rollins and Reed moving forward, what it means for both men. How quickly does Rollins get back into the world title picture? And, does Reed start to get into a title picture of his own? If it's not the world title, could it be, the Intercontinental Championship? Could you have Reed be the person that eventually dethrones Jey Uso as the Intercontinental Champion? There's lots of possibilities to work with here. But Seth Rollins is back, and it seems like we're going to quickly get into that feud between him and the person who took him out, Bronson Reed, who was not the last monster standing on this episode. It was Braun Strowman. But speaking of championships, there was a lot on this show. I thought this was a very jam-packed 3-hour edition of WWE Monday Night Raw, which we will not be saying that again for the near future because this was the last 3-hour Raw, at least for the foreseeable future, as Raw moves to 2 hours. And you're going to get some of this stuff in the mid-card that starts to, probably take a little bit of a back seat here. But there's a couple things that won't because they really built up next week's show. When's the last time? I'm sure, maybe someone has the stat out there. But when's the last time we had a World Heavyweight Championship match and an Intercontinental Championship match on the same edition of Monday Night Raw? That's what we're going to get next week because two things were set in motion here. We'll start with the World Heavyweight Championship because we know now it's going to be Gunther versus Sami Zayn as they are going to square off next week for the World Heavyweight title. And, this was one where Zayn had been sort of trying time and time again to get Gunther to accept this challenge. And finally, after Gunther, snaps, after Zayn said something about how Gunther's dad's going to, sort of look at him as a coward and these things, Gunther snaps, takes out Zayn, gives him what he wants. And so we're going to get that championship match next week. And look, again, to have the same kind of setting here, right? Last week it was Jey versus Bron Breakker. Didn't think that Jey could win the championship. I do not think Sami Zayn's going to win the championship next week. But because they made the title switch last week with Jey beating Bron Breakker, I at least have to give it a little bit of a thought, right? Could they do it again? Could you have Sami as the world champion, Jey as the Intercontinental Champion? Are these things actually going to happen? That is what WWE is sort of set in motion here in terms of adding sort of that Attitude Era type feel, I think, to, the main events. And whether it was last week, whether it was this week, again, with this completely different way with the last Monster Standing match, there is a lot more intrigue. And I love the way they're doing this right now. And people can be upset, and I've seen plenty of, criticism. Well, why in the world is Gunther versus Zayn not on the PLE? Why is it not at Bad Blood? Well, I think, as we've said before, and we talked about this, I want to say even after, WrestleMania, it was one of the things Triple H said in one of the press conferences was about, look, the way they're doing these cards now with the 5-match PLEs is you've still got to have some of that stuff for Raw and SmackDown. You've got to give people a reason to tune in. And I think there's nothing wrong with doing Gunther versus Sami as the main event for Raw. Because remember, it used to be the way it was, right? You didn't just get the best matches on the pay-per-views back in the day. You would still get some of these big, high-profile championship matches on the weekly TV, and people can, debate whether that was a good thing or bad thing, ultimately. Maybe in WCW's case, it was a little bit of a bad thing at times. But still, I don't really have an issue with this because they're going to have a good match, but you also know maybe there is that possibility where there's going to be a little bit more involved than just a straight-up wrestling match here between Gunther and Zayn. Who knows? Could anyone interfere? Possibly, although Triple H has been pretty good. At least he was, in the Jey Breakker match last week. There was no, interference. It was straight-up one-on-one for the championship. But could Bron Breakker get involved? Because you heard him kind of, tease meeting Gunther a bit sooner rather than later. That Gunther's going to find out how big of a badass Bron Breakker is. I don't see him getting involved maybe next week, but you just never know. And I think I'm fine with this being the World Championship match next week on Raw versus the PLE, where, quite honestly, it's a big match, but it's going to get lost in the field of Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns teaming for the first time to take on the Bloodline. It's going to get lost in something else we're about to talk about in a minute with the Hell in a Cell match between CM Punk and Drew McIntyre. So it would not feel as big. But the fact that it's the main event next week on Raw, it's the biggest thing because it is the championship match and the main event slot on the first 2-hour Raw in, 12 plus years. So I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I don't think you just have to throw every single match on the PLE to say it's better than the other matches that are not on the PLE. You can spread these out, and that's what they're doing here. And so I like the idea of having Gunther versus Zayn next week on Raw. So that is set in motion now. We're going to have that. And we mentioned Bron Breakker, Jey Uso, the Intercontinental Championship situation. Breakker comes out. We kind of get a sign of respect between the two, although Breakker did leave after the handshake, clearly a little bit frustrated, you could tell, the fact that he lost that Intercontinental Championship. But we know now Jey's going to defend the title next week against Xavier Woods because you had the stuff here again with New Day kind of playing out in this one where Xavier Woods is able to, get the win over Rey Mysterio, and he pulls off Rey's mask in the process. And Woods is claiming, hey, I didn't mean to do it, all this other stuff, but he still got the win, and he did it, so it happened. And then you have him accidentally cost Kofi Kingston in his match against Chad Gable, so we're still teasing that split between the New Day here, but you are going to have Xavier Woods challenge Jey for the title next week. And again, I'm kind of curious where they're going from here. I think a lot of the speculation continues to be that with this New Day thing, of course, it's different than what it would have been when you had Odyssey Jones in the mix, but we know he's no longer with the company. But you've got to eventually be leading to something where Big E gets involved. Not as a wrestler, but, Big E comes in as kind of the mediator to get the New Day back together at some point down the road. I don't know how immediate that will be, but you've got to think that's one of that's that big moment they're building to with this whole New Day stuff. So I think that's certainly something that we have to look at down the road in the future. But I wonder, are they just going to go ahead and take off with this Xavier Woods singles, opportunity here and give him a chance to shine in that spot? Because it's just not something we've seen, even though we are coming up on that, anniversary of the New Day and all that. And I think next week's going to be interesting because, could you have Kofi be someone who accidentally cost Xavier Woods his Intercontinental Championship match against Jey? There are different ideas to work with there. Speaking of Jey, though, he did say in his promo here, something we have to bring up. He kind of said what we talked about last week, right? And we said after Jey won the Intercontinental Championship, he put himself in a very advantageous position because if he's going to get back into this Bloodline business, whenever it is, whether that's Survivor Series, whether that's beyond, as we said, maybe that's a possibility now. Maybe this thing's going a lot longer than we thought. But he now holds the power over Roman Reigns and Jey Uso. And Jey brought up here talking about how Roman made it hard for him to ever get to this point, right? His family made it hard for him to ever get to being a singles champion. But he finally got here. And now, he's kind of ready to prove himself. And so, they're clearly adding those tidbits in. The fact that Jey brought up Roman Reigns here, that is kind of the story we figured they would tell, and that's where they're going to go from here. But he did mention him, which means these two are going to have to interact at some point with each other in the near future. It's just a matter of when is that put in motion. So Jey versus Xavier Woods next week for the Intercontinental Championship. And we said Gunther versus Sami Zayn as well. The other stuff on this show, CM Punk and Drew McIntyre, certainly building towards, will they be the main event at at Bad Blood, inside Hell in a Cell? And I think people are wondering, should that be the main event? Should it be Cody and Reigns teaming up against the Bloodline? Probably all depends on what you're going to do. I said Punk and McIntyre is going to be the best match. The match that has probably the biggest angle is going to be Cody and Reigns versus the Bloodline. So it depends on which one WWE wants to put in that final spot. They usually, I think, in these scenarios, like to go with the big angle at the end versus what may be. But let's be honest. Punk and McIntyre is the best feud in WWE right now. It's been the best feud of the year. I'd argue it's probably been the best feud of the Triple H era in charge, however long that's been now. I just think they have hit all the right buttons. And I know some people have said, you know what? I don't have the same interest I had maybe before SummerSlam, where you had that match. It didn't exactly get to that physicality that you thought it would. But we said at the time, it all depends on how many matches they're going to do, right? If they're going to do 3 matches, which this is going to be the final part of the trilogy, you understand why they're kind of pacing themselves a little bit. And so I think each time now, the strap matches, we said, got more violent. This is going to be something where they have no choice but to just beat the absolute hell out of each other inside Hell in a Cell. And they've set it up this way, right? It's Drew McIntyre coming out dressed in black here like he's going to a funeral because he's saying that, he's doing it out of respect for AJ because she's going to have to feed Punk. She's going to have to bathe him. She may wind up leaving him because of what he's going to do to CM Punk inside Hell in a Cell. And then it's Punk talking about how Drew said that, hey, he prayed that this would happen, and Drew's about to find out he's going to be praying to CM Punk when he's, standing over him and all these things. So, these two have escalated it now to this point to where let's just get to the match because we know these two are just going to go all out to make this as special as it can be, and we will do our Bad Blood predictions tomorrow most likely, and I think it's going to be one where there's going to be some very interesting developments for both of these guys coming out of this particular show. And they're gonna let it all out here, because this is the match they've been building to for all these months. This is the one where they have to sort of deliver in the spot. I think they will, and I thought it was a nice touch to actually put them inside the cell here, have the officials in there to keep them from getting at each other physically, and your final sort of war of words here to get them ready for Hell in a Cell on Saturday. So, yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I think that we're going to enjoy the match probably even more in terms of what's to come here with that. But elsewhere on this edition of Raw, like I said, it's 3-hour Raw, a lot of stuff in there as usual, but there are a lot of different things coming out of the show. We'll see how much of this stuff makes it on next week's edition, because, again, it's a 2-hour Raw next week. You're going to have to cut some of these things where you may not be able to further some of these stories in the exact same way. But you also had the Judgment Day, where it's going to be Finn Balor versus Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley versus Liv Morgan at Bad Blood. You had the numbers game in Judgment Day's favor, play out here on this particular episode, where it's Balor getting involved in the 6-man tag team match. He sends a message to Damian Priest. Liv Morgan tries to do the same to Rhea Ripley. You get a brouhaha on your hands where everybody's, kind of going at each other here. And then it is the Judgment Day using that numbers advantage. As we've said, that's what they have in their favor against Priest and Ripley right now. And they use that here. I'm very fascinated to see where they go with these two singles matches. Again, we'll talk about that in the Bad Blood predictions video. But I think this was one where you had to make Judgment Day feel pretty strong heading into these matches, they at least get the advantage here, and we'll see if that's going to be the case actually on Saturday in those two singles matches. You guys know I've said it before. I don't think both Judgment Day members can lose. I could certainly see a split in those matches, because I don't think you can go 2-0 one way or the other. I think you probably got to have a split in terms of, Judgment Day wins one, Terrence win another, but which one is it going to be? And I think that's really what this comes down to. We'll talk more about it in our Bad Blood predictions. But, yeah, this was Judgment Day getting a bit of an advantage in terms of leaving Priest laying in the ring, beaten down from the attack from Balor and company here. And so, of course, Dominic getting also introduced to the Shark Cage, which he'll be in at Bad Blood as well. Speaking of Dominic, hope you've all gone out and bought your Dominic Mysterio toilet paper, available now on WWEshop.com. I have not, and will not be wiping with Dominic Mysterio anytime soon. But if you are, please let me know in the comments how it feels. But beyond that, on this week's edition, a couple other quick notes as I'm going through my notes here. Of course, you had Miz turn on R-Truth. I don't think that means the Miz is going to be in the Final Testament. That would just seem very odd. But you did have Miz break away, something they've been teasing for a little bit now after they lost the tag team championships. Miz getting frustrated, probably wanted to go back to his old ways. So they did have him turn on R-Truth here, so we know we're going to get something coming out of that. Moving forward, you also had some stuff going on, still with the women's division, as, Caden Carter and Katana Chance made their return to get involved with the stuff with Pure Fusion Collective. They helped out Lyra Valkyria. You've still got Alba Fire and Isla Dawn trying to chase the championships. Damage Control, we get a video from them here saying they want to, take aim at Bianca Belair and Jade Cargill. So stuff in motion with the women's division. Still think, there are some things that can continue to improve for sure in terms of the tag team division and such. But that's kind of where we are right now. Because I think you think about it, right? Everyone's kind of involved in the tag team division, because really the women's world championship has really all been about Liv and Rhea. There's not really been anyone else involved in this for a while now. So I think we have to get somewhere with that after Bad Blood, but we'll see exactly what they decide to do there. You had the setup. We're also next week, we're going to have Sheamus versus Pete Dunne. They're going to beat the hell out of each other on Raw next week. The Donnybrook match is officially on. So that's one that's been building for a bit. So you're going to get that as well in terms of one of your featured matches next week. And as I go through everything else here, we did get the announcement that Ilja Dragunov is out 6 to 9 months after the ACL injury, where he got injured in that match against Gunther at the live event. And that is just brutal, because you guys know we had talked about it. We're like, hey, they surely want to get to a Gunther versus Dragunov match, maybe for that world championship at some point during Gunther's reign here. Could Gunther still be the champion 6 to 9 months from now? Sure he could. But you've got to think, though, at least, if there is anything coming out of this that you can look at and say, all right, that may work in Dragunov's favor, is the fact that he did get injured in a match with Gunther, right? And so we know WWE kind of how they like to play that stuff in to the storyline once someone returns from injury. And so I think that is definitely something where once Dragunov, recovers from injury, he will get an opportunity at Gunther if Gunther is still the world champion. Either way, we're going to get that Gunther versus Dragunov match, but it is brutal that he is sidelined because, again, it seemed like he was kind of set in motion to start getting involved maybe with the Judgment Day after Bad Blood and start to work his way back, more into a featured spot and also be in that Intercontinental Championship picture as well. So, best wishes for a speedy recovery for Ilja Dragunov because, I think they've got some big things planned for him, but they will have to wait for a bit here. And then we also had, the video package involving the Wyatt Six here, and as people have kind of noted, it involved kind of a woman's face here, and I think people at first were thinking, okay, is that just Nikki Cross? But I think you're seeing some things in there that lead you in the direction of believing that it is Alexa Bliss. And so I think that is something where we kind of knew when this group was formed, you feel like you had to get Alexa involved at some point, and I wonder if we're working towards that at some point soon, because that seemed to be one of the things that was kind of teased here. But I also didn't, do the QR code and all that, but I think a lot of people kind of are speculating that is something that we're building towards. So there you go. A lot, like I said, on this week's edition of Raw. They packed a lot into this 3 hours, but as usual, my biggest thing is that everyone has a purpose here. Everyone is out to achieve something. They're involved with someone else, and they're not just there to be there. And I think that is what I enjoy the most, and you guys have heard me say that time and time again about the Triple H era. Even if everything is not the same level in terms of interest, there are at least people who have a reason to be on Raw. Like, they are not just there to be there. You see them, and then, you have no idea why they're there. Everyone kind of has a backstory. Everyone has a motivation and a goal that they want to achieve, and that helps you get way more invested, I think, in those wrestlers and, kind of get more invested in the stories too. So, yeah, that was Raw. I'm sure there's something I've forgotten left out, but again, there was a lot of stuff here as I'm looking down my notes. Probably one of the longest bits of notes I've had on Raw in a while. But we'll see how long it is next week because it goes from 3 hours to 2 hours. But I want to know what you guys thought of this week's edition of Raw. What did you think about everything that took place? I mean, take it wherever you want because there's a lot of things to pick from. And again, give me your early predictions for Bad Blood. We'll do our video with our Bad Blood predictions this week. But I appreciate you guys watching as always. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Hit that like button on your way out. As I continue to mention, I'm also on Twitter now. So be sure to follow me on Twitter. Trying to tweet a little bit more. Don't know if that's a good idea, but hey, I'm at least interacting with some of you guys on there already. But you can follow me on Twitter if you'd like to be able to, kind of see some of this stuff. I share a lot of wrestling history on Twitter, so it's not just, the stuff commenting on the current stuff, but also, kind of share a lot of stuff in terms of wrestling history as well. So old magazine clippings, old kind of this day in history type stuff, looking back at the Attitude Era and such. So there's a lot of fun stuff on there. You can follow me there, again, at WrestleBlake if you want to follow me on Twitter. But appreciate you guys watching as always. Let me know your thoughts on this week's edition of WWE Raw.